Okay, here we go. Setting up your meeting. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We are live, and God willing, the technology is going to work. This is always my biggest fear. So for all of you who are watching, it's a wing and a prayer, folks, a wing and a prayer, yes. Welcome to the second episode of Merrick Library's author series. I'm your host, Carol Ann Tack, your very, very grateful host. I just want to give everybody out there a special shout out, especially to our Merrick patrons, everyone near and far who is joining us for this second episode. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy, and with all of the options you have out there to watch things on television and all kinds of social media streaming, I am so glad that you are here with us tonight. You're in for an incredible treat. I also do want to give a very special shout out to our very first guest, which was debut author James Wade. He joined us last month. We talked about his debut, All Things Left Wild. We talked horror books, we talked movies, and as he said, he was the crash test dummy for the first episode. So cheers to you, James. Yeah, exactly. Special thanks to Jordan and Juniper Wade for letting us monopolize his time. We are so thrilled. But tonight, episode 2 of the Merrick Library author series, I am thrilled to host A.H. Kim. A.H. Kim appeared on episode 44 of the Top Shelf at Merrick Library podcast for her striking debut, which is called A Good Family. I'm going to show you the cover. Why don't I have a book? Yes, well, I never have the book. This is the second time, because once these books come out and we start book talking them, they are never in. So I don't even have an actual copy of the book to show you, but this is the fabulous cover. And with that, I'm going to ask all of our, hey, there it is. I'm going to ask everyone out there, viewers, to please give a big virtual applause to debut author A.H. Kim. And thank you so very much for being here tonight.
Oh, Carol Ann, thanks. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me on the podcast before, which was so much fun. I tweeted about how I feel like I found my soul sister in you, because you completely got all the nuances of my book, and you really appreciated the little peaks, the parts that I wanted to highlight. And then I did not realize that I'm only your second guest on this. So Thank you for that as well. What a huge honor. Guest. Thank you.
I'm so thrilled you're here. You are the second guest, which is why I said thank you so much for saying yes to the dress when you did this. I want to talk about the book right away, because as we spoke about A Good Family in the podcast, there it is, A Good Family, one of the things we talked about is, in my opinion, the book is a mashup of a couple of different things. So HBO right now has been doing some bang up work with things like Succession. I am obsessed with Succession. I feel like A Good Family is a mashup of Succession and HBO's Big Little Lies. And now HBO is giving us a show called The Undoing. And I feel like all three of those things are a mashup of A Good Family. And so I, of course, now I have already cast Beth Lindstrom because.
So who do you think should be Beth?
Well, I can't stop looking at Nicole Kidman for the past 3 years on all of these shows. So Nicole carries blonde hair beautifully. So I feel like she would be the perfect patrician Beth Lindstrom. But I'm going to stop talking and let you tell everybody, tell all of the listeners and the viewers, tell us about A Good Family, because this is just, I love this book. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you. So it's funny that you should mention Big Little Lies, because when you're trying to sell your book to publishers, you do have to do kind of what they call comps or comparatives. And so we compared it to Big Little Lies meets Orange is the New Black.
Right.
And so with Big Little Lies, you've got kind of the family drama, a lot of women's drama. It's not kind of big picture war or, guns ablazing or anything like that, but it's really about the kind of dramas that you have within a family, that you have in relationships. So there's there's the Big Little Lies portion. And then the Orange is the New Black portion is a reference to the fact that about half of the book actually takes place in a women's prison. And so you can see kind of all the different things that Orange is the New Black kind of gives you a peek into, like, you know, what kind of food do they eat in prison? Or, you know, is it true that you can go shopping in prison? And, you know, what is it like to live, you know, with your freedoms taken away? So it's the combination of the two.
And it is shocking. The book starts off with its incredible opening chapter, which then switches. So you think one thing is happening, but then you do this nice little bait and switch. And the next thing we know, we are the viewers sitting in that car as we're driving somebody to being handed over to a prison. And again, as you mentioned, you've got this Orange is the New Black thing that's happening with this woman going into sort of a white collar prison, which was just, I mean, you had, like you said, can you go shopping in prison? Can you do these things in prison? What I love especially about the fact that the character Beth is going off to prison is because the book says a good family. And when I think of a good family, to me, I always am so struck by that expression, because I always think to myself, you know, when you say a good family, when I think about my street, or, you know, people who are watching can think about their street. And if you extend yourself a little further, or maybe around the block from where you live, your own neighborhood, and then you go even further than that and you think about the people in your town. Now, if I were to say to somebody, well, you know, that person, they have a good family, or they come from a good family, there is a family that everyone can think of that jumps to your mind. And how do you qualify a good family? Is it that they have great kids? Do they have a happy marriage? Are they still together? Is it a big house? It's defined by the person who is projecting this good family, which is what I love about this book, because you've done that. And I'm paddling your canoe here, but I love that all of these things signify something solid, a solid foundation, a solid family. So we put up this image for people to see, and it really it's consistent with what you think a good family should be. And that's what you do here.
Well, it's funny that you should start off the interview with talking about movies and about Nicole Kidman in particular, because I was actually on a flight back from visiting my parents yesterday. And so, you know, I sit there on the plane and I'm scrolling through to see if there's any movies that I haven't seen that I'd like to watch. And I watched The Goldfinch, which is the Donna Tartt book, which is fabulous.
Fabulous.
And the movie stars Nicole Kidman as this beautiful patrician woman. So it's funny. I mean, all the words that you were just describing for Beth is very much what I saw in Nicole Kidman's portrayal of the mother in The Goldfinch. And there too, she is, you know, very waspy. They live in a beautiful home. She's got the, you know, the gorgeous children. And yet, even in that family as well, there are all these dysfunctions. You know, there's a death in the family. There's just sad things that happen. And I think that was part of the message of my book, A Good Family, which is that when you look at Beth Lindstrom's family, everyone is blonde and beautiful, and they wear, you know, designer clothes, and they have beautiful designer decorated homes. And yet, of course, then almost instantaneously, we realize she's headed off to women's prison because she pled guilty in a whistleblower lawsuit. And so how do those things go together? Somebody who pleads guilty in a you know, criminal case, coming from this good family. And then meanwhile, you have this other family, this Korean American family. So Hannah Min, who's the law librarian. And I will say
law
that
librarians.
Yeah, I know. I love law librarians. I love librarians generally. And so I think growing up as an immigrant in this country, when people would say good family, I would think about those patrician families, those people whose families came over on the Mayflower. And so it's about breeding and heritage and those kinds of things. But, you know, there's, as you say, many ways to define a good family. And for many people, a good family is an intact family, is a family that supports one another, a family that sticks together through thick and thin. And I think that's, you know, that's Hannah as well. She's that kind of good family.
Yeah.
So there's multiple meanings of good family in the book.
And I love Hannah. I think she is just, she's great. I love the way you portray her. I love Beth's voice. And actually last week to prep, I listened to the audiobook, and man, I have to tell you something. I've come over the, during these COVID times I do a lot of walking, and I'm always out just walking, but that walking eats into my reading time. So finally I figured out a way to adjust my ears to listening to audiobooks, and I have not looked back. So when I hear your book read, it is even more impactful than the page, which is shocking to me. But maybe because I knew most of what was going to happen. One of the things you said in the podcast was that you encourage people to read it twice. Read A Good Family twice, because you start to see things, the little breadcrumbs you leave to disseminating or figuring out exactly what's going on in this whistleblower case, which is amazing, which is why I think of Succession and Big Little Lies, because some crime is committed and we just need to know who blew the whistle on Beth. And
Right.
Hannah is there, and she's kind of visiting Beth in prison. I really don't want to say too much because I just think readers are going to love it. And we already know, because all I have is, is the picture to share with
Yeah.
everybody. So, um, but I do want to go back over the reviews, right? So Maureen Carrigan, everybody knows who Maureen Carrigan is. She gave it such an incredible review. She said she talks about them being a welcome assurance that nobody has it all, at least not forever. So there's this like jealousy aspect that people sort of are snarky when they say a good family, maybe, or well, maybe it's not that all that it's cracked up to be to live that way.
Well, so right now, as we're talking, the National Book Awards is happening,
Yes,
and
I
so
know.
there's all of these kind of, I won't say highfalutin books because that makes it sound like I'm being judgy, but but very highly acclaimed books. And I think of Maureen Corrigan as the quintessential book reviewer, and I think of her as reviewing those highfalutin books, the literary fiction books. And so
Right.
when I found out that she had reviewed my book, I was stunned. And I think her review was very positive, but it was clear to me as well that it was sort of a fun read for her. It was a little bit of a step off of the National Book Award kinds of books, and it was just like a fun read for her. And one of the things she said is like, part of the fun of reading this book is being constantly sucker punched by the next new revelation that comes out of nowhere. And so in the first chapter of A Good Family, you start out with this beautiful home. It's kind of this night scene. It seems sort of quiet. There's a lot of observation by Hannah. And then it ends with a revelation, just like you start to see the dysfunction of the family. And then the second chapter, you're going for a drive and you see the rolling countryside next to you. And then you realize you're going to prison. And so it's true, like every chapter, it starts out one way and you think it's something, and then you just get a kind of a sucker punch, as Maureen Corrigan said. So I think that's part of the fun of it. And I've had people ask me, how do you keep track of all the lies in your book? And I tell them, there are no lies in my book. Everything in the book is actually true. But when you're reading it and you have certain assumptions about what's happening, you read it one way. And this is why I tell people to read it a second time, because once you've read it through and you see, oh, that's what really happened. Once you read it that second time, you start to see, oh, I read it this way, but it actually meant that.
It's amazing how you do that. I don't know how you keep, as a writer, stylistically, narratively, I don't know how you keep track of that. That's an amazing thing that you do. And I think that for me, that must be very hard. I mean, I can't keep track, I've got like props, so I don't know, I've got my props, but how you keep track of that? Do you write sort of, how do you do that as you're writing? How does that work for you? Like, how do you write it down? Do you sort of keep track? How do you keep track of it?
Right. Well, I did make a choice that I was not going to lie throughout my book. So I didn't have to sort of track lies because I wasn't lying throughout the book. But I think, I hate to say this, but I think as a lawyer, we know how to parse words. And so some of it is about maybe saying something that is true, but you've omitted a fact, or you've omitted something that would give the reader a real sense of what's going on. And so it's sort of lying by omission, or stating half truths. And so I think that when you go through that second time and you find those little breadcrumbs, it's more about the half truths or the assumptions that you're making rather than any kind of lies.
And that's what this whole thing is about, the assumptions. We make assumptions about the people we know. We make assumptions about the people that live behind the houses in these, beautiful suburban locations and these bucolic places. And, you're sort of driving through wherever you're driving and you say, wow, what do they do? What kind of job do they have that they live in that house? It's just human nature. You can't help but be that sort of armchair watcher out the window and saying, I wonder what's going on there. And that's what I just love. That is an Achilles heel for me, are these suburban family dramas. And when they're done so well, especially as well as this, it keeps the reader riveted. I want to also give a quote that Angie Kim, who is also a guest on Top Shelf podcast, when she says, this is a smart debut that will keep the readers turning the pages until the surprising conclusion. And she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right.
Well, what a great quote to come from Angie, who herself is such a great suspenseful writer. And I mean, her book, Miracle Creek, I just ripped through that because every page I was just wanting to find out what happened next. And that also had a surprising conclusion. So to get that lovely quote from Angie is incredible. I want to go back to what you were talking about before with the audiobook, because when a book comes out, especially like a debut book, a lot of the trade reviews, the reviews from places like Booklist or Kirkus come out early, right when the book comes out. And I recently got a new Booklist review, and it was for the audiobook.
Oh, that's great.
And it was a rave, which was lovely. But it's not just great, obviously, because they liked the book, but also they raved about the three actresses who narrated the book. So we have one actress, Joy Osmonsky, who plays Hannah. And
she was great. They were all great. I'm telling you, they were all great.
Yeah. So we recently, the audiobook is, not to plug it too much, but the audiobook's on sale right now. And I made a graphic with the pictures of the three actresses because they did such a fabulous job. And so when people ask me, like, do you have people in mind for the movie? I actually have those people in mind because they just, I feel like, well, they already read the book. They already did a great job. They already know the characters. Give them the job.
And I saw that you had, so I listened to the book, and then I try not to go and look to see what the narrators look like, because in my mind, they can only be the character that I've just read. So I think like in Frederick Bachman's books, Maureen Ireland does almost all his narrating. I don't want to know what she looks like because I have a vision of the people that she's playing at any given time. And the same thing with these three amazing actresses. So when I saw the pictures, I thought, oh my gosh, there they are. And I got a little starstruck. Like, I thought if I ever saw them in the street, well, who knows when we'll actually be walking in the street again. But I thought I would go right up to them and say, you were an amazing Beth. I mean, the woman who plays Beth is just, you must have been so pleased. Did they send you voice resumes, or I'm not sure how it works with audiobooks?
Yeah, it's so being a debut author, there are so many fun new experiences. And one of the highlights was when the publishers said, okay, well, we are now casting for your audiobook.
Oh my gosh.
And so even just hearing that they were making an audiobook, because they don't always do that, was thrilling. And so then they said, so we are going to be sending you the sort of the headshots, a short resume, like a short description of the actress. And then they've read the same little piece, like, so the characters or the actresses who are reading for Hannah read a little portion of the Hannah section. Same thing for Beth, same thing for Lisa. And I was allowed to sort of rate my top choices, but they said, don't get your heart set on anybody because we can't be sure that we'll be able to get your top
Okay.
choice. And so these three actresses were by far my number one choices for each of these roles. And I was trying not to get my heart set on them, but I thought, oh gosh, if I don't get these actresses, I'll be a little disappointed. And so when they came back and told me all three said yes, all three are available, I was over the moon. And so then the audiobook was released right on the same day as the official release of my book. Now, the book, of course, I've had in my hand for over a year by the time it got released in the bookstores, but the audiobook I hadn't heard. So that night of my book release, I plugged in and started to listen to my book for the first time on audiobook, and it was
Did you have jitters like when you were listening? Were you like butterflies in your stomach just to hear somebody else read the words?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And then they got all the inflections right, and like you were saying with Beth in particular, she has to be very cool and detached and just, an ice princess. And she captured that element so well.
I'm actually getting the chills right now. I'm just full disclosure.
So that book list review of the three actresses was so great because it said, like Hannah, Joy really captured the kind of I don't know, the quiet, reserved, observational quality of Hannah. And Abby Creighton, who plays Beth, had that cold, detached ice princess quality. And then Sarah Mola Christensen, who reads the Lisa part, which is the smallest part in many ways because it's just little deposition transcripts. But she's very naive, and she's kind of, I won't say a dumb blonde, but a little bit like naive and manipulated. And she captures that quality so well.
She does it. I was not expecting to hear her voice right during the deposition. So that when that happened, I thought, oh my gosh, this is really, there must be somebody, and I know there are probably a team of experts who put this whole thing and direct that whole audio piece to make it as really compelling and fabulous as it was. I don't think I've exhausted all my adjectives.
I know, I have to look up the thesaurus.
Yeah, right on my phone. But I keep it handy. But it's yes, whoever directed that whole piece, the way it comes together as an audiobook, it was just terrific. And I loved what they did with the audiobook. And so you must have been, now, did you listen to it in one sitting? Did you finish it, or did you?
I did. I couldn't possibly listen to it in one sitting.
Yeah.
It was like 12 hours or something like that. Right. And it was actually the day of my launch. So my launch was July 14th. And so that morning, I think I had an interview at 7 a.m. on the radio. And then I had a 10 a.m. interview. And then so that first day was very busy. And then I had my kind of official launch event around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening. And so it was just like, it was like a wedding day or something. It was sort of a mad rush of events. And so I don't think I started to listen to the audiobook until about 10 o'clock.
Oh my gosh, you must have been exhausted, right?
Yeah, so I was exhausted. So I think I only listened to, a few chapters, but I wanted to hear all the different voices.
Yeah, it was great.
And then I fell asleep. So I true confession, I actually haven't listened to the whole thing.
Well, you know what? Spoiler alert. I think you know what happened. I wanted to ask okay, so you are actually a practicing attorney, and you do this full time.
I do.
And somehow you were able to squeeze in writing a good family. How does, and you have kids, and how does that, I don't want to ask you which you like better because video is forever, but how does that, do you feel, is it a welcome respite when you can sit down and write on the page and sort of focus on that, and then it taking you away from the workplace?
Yes. so right now my children are actually grown and they don't live in my home anymore. So I have a lot more time to write. But I don't really think it's a matter of hours or time. I think it's more a matter of focus. And I was lucky enough to be featured in Poets and Writers 5 over 50 feature about writers who have published their first books over 50. And I do think that there's a point in your life where you sort of say, I want to do this. And it can be, I want to run a marathon, or I want to publish a book, or I want to learn how to bake sourdough bread. But once you set your mind to it, I think that really gives you this great focus to achieve. And I think other folks have like a vague thought, like, oh, maybe someday I'd like to do it. But if when it's vague like that, it's really hard to sort of get traction. And so I did, when I was in my late 40s, have this kind of sudden revelation that I wanted to be a published author. And my goal was to be published by the time I was 50, which I failed. I was published by the time I was 55. But I think when you set your goal, I mean, and your intention kind of, and you put it out there in the universe, it really helps to, that's the way you get things done.
Well, I'm going to thank the entire universe for bringing you to all of us, because that is something really to be grateful for. The next, I do want to ask, was A Good Family always the title? I don't remember asking that in the podcast. And I remember after I was done and we hung up, I thought, why didn't I ask that question? So serendipitously, here we are. Yeah. Was that always your title?
No, my original title, and in some ways, the title that I still think of is False Claims. And so having read the book, you know that the whistleblower statute, the law that gets Beth put into prison, is called the False Claims Act. And the False Claims Act is a federal law that allows individuals to file a whistleblower lawsuit against any individual or corporation that is defrauding the federal government. So I don't think this is a spoiler. So the legal issue that gets Beth put into prison is that she works for a pharmaceutical company that is accused of misleading advertisements or misleading promotion of her drug. And so that's false claims. Right. And as we talked about earlier, this book is all about sort of false perceptions or false assumptions or false claims that people have. So I liked that it had that double meaning of the law and the premise of the book. But I think that the publishers thought that it sounded too legalistic, kind of like a John Grisham novel or something. And it's not a John Grisham novel. It's really much more of a domestic drama. And so A Good Family captured that element of the story much better.
Yeah, and I was thinking Scott Turow, actually, when you said false claims. That's who I thought of. And I thought, well, I would have read that anyway. Did you have to go back and forth on that? Or did they just sort of say this is?
We did go back and forth, and we had an interim working title, which was The Rules of Privilege, which again has a double meaning, because privilege is your ability to say, I don't have to testify because I have either attorney-client privilege or spousal privilege or something. And it's also, the book itself is about privilege and people who have money and have access to private school education and all those kinds of things. So that kind of privilege. But that
could be the Netflix title.
Yeah, so that one fell by the wayside, which was fine because it was actually a little bit hard to pronounce, all those R's and L's.
Right.
So A Good Family is much easier to pronounce.
And so of course the book comes out during this summer, COVID, and James Wade, who was on last month, also his book, this came out during the spring, summer. How has that, I mean, you are available on certain social medias. You can tell everybody where they can find you so that they can see you doing these things, book discussions or Zoom lives or wherever you're presenting. How was it for you to do all these Zoom events this way, or meeting your readers? Has it been, I guess it's been a little easier, maybe because you can go more places without physically going?
Well, so I started to go to book events, like live book events, almost 2 years ago, because I knew that I had a book deal. I knew my book was going to be coming out. And so I wanted to sort of, see how other authors were handling their book events. Do they do readings? Do they just do Q&A? Do they sign books? Do they not sign books? And so I had been doing that for a while, and I had in my mind the ideas for my own book tour and my own readings. And then, of course, COVID happened, and
Right.
all those things went kind of down the drain. I feel that I was lucky because my book came out in July, and of course, COVID sort of struck in March. And I feel really badly for those authors whose books came out in March and April, because at that point, things like your podcast, things like your this Facebook Live event hadn't really coalesced. And
Right.
so they basically had a vacuum, no way to promote their books. By the time July came, people were having online events. Bookstores had figured out how to do online launches, things like that. So it was fine for me. Of course, I would love to do an in-person event. Of course, I would love to interact with a real reader and sign their book. But Zoom and these kinds of Facebook Live events have been a great way for me to reach people outside of the Bay Area. So I think with this, my book, while it's been pretty successful, it's not a huge book with a huge publicity budget behind it. So I would have probably done most of my promotional events in the Bay Area. I wouldn't have come out to New York. I wouldn't
Right.
have done an event in Omaha, Nebraska, or Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, places that I have done events, thanks to the wonders of Zoom. So I think there's definitely been a silver lining to the pandemic, which has allowed me to have sort of a broader array of events.
And where can readers and viewers find you? What's your website?
So my website is ahkim.net. And I try to keep that up to date with all of my interviews and the links to the Facebook Live events. There are some excerpts from the book. There's excerpts of me reading the book.
That
So lots of
chapter
stuff.
that you read, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but that chapter that you read, like, just it was you did a fine job. I think.
Thank you.
If writing doesn't work out, the narrating, well, of course it will, but I mean, you narrated that first chapter, and I listened to it, and I thought, wow, it was great. So I love that you gave that to future fans and readers. I know this is not the right question to ask, but are you doing, now that A Good Family is out and people are reading it, do you have anything, what's next for you? Do you have anything else in mind that you'd like to do next?
Yeah, so I've actually already written another book, a second book, which is a modern retelling of Sense and Sensibility.
Oh my goodness.
Which I love. It's sort of it's not as kind of suspenseful a book as A Good Family. It's more kind of fun, a little bit of a romantic romp. And long story short, it takes a while to get those things out in the world and to get a publishing deal and all those things. And so while I'm waiting for that to happen, I've started yet another book, which is sort of more in the line of A Good Family. So it's more of a kind of a domestic / legal thriller where somebody disappears and you have to figure out what happens. Yeah. So I'm working on that now. I don't know if you've heard of it. There's a thing called NaNoWriMo.
Yes.
So November is National Novel Writing Month. And the goal is to write a novel in 1 month, or the beginnings of a novel, 50,000 words, I believe it is. And so I signed up for NaNoWrimo this year, and I'm woefully behind. I've only got like 10, 15,000 words, but still I comfort myself by saying those are 10, 15,000 words I didn't have before.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on now.
I think that's amazing. We will take it. And I follow that whole group on Twitter when everyone's on doing that, and they're all exchanging stories and battle issues, and I just, it's really wonderful to read all of that and everybody writing. It's a nice place. It's a safe place.
Yeah. Well, let's see, 3 or 4 years ago, I joined this group of writers, and we exchange little bits of our manuscripts in progress and get feedback on, is this working? Does this character, resonate with you? That kind of thing. And that was the first time that I had heard of NaNoWriMo. And so she had said, oh yeah, I wrote this novel in 1 month. And it was sort of like my head exploded. I said, you wrote a novel in 1 month? Like, how is that even possible? So, so this year is the first time I'm trying to do it. And again, I'm not succeeding. I'm not writing 50,000 words this month, but maybe hopefully by the end of it, I'll have 25,000 words. And that's,
right.
A third of the way there.
That's fine. That's more than most. And I think you pat yourself on the back for that. Before I let you go, because I am mindful of your time, you shared a wonderful story on the podcast when I asked you what writers you were reading or what books you had read. And you shared a beautiful story about Kim, the name Kim. So if you could just sort of tell that, I think that's a beautiful thing that you said.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, I wish I could take my computer and walk it over to my library. So as an immigrant girl growing up in Buffalo, New York, I went to the library, the public library, every week or two, and I would go in and check out my books. And I was a curious child, so I would go around and not only just look at the children's book section, but over to the adult book section. I would look at the names and see, the author names. And I would look for Kim because that's my last name. And Kim is a very, very common last name. So people sometimes say it's like the Smith of Koreans, but it's way more than the Smiths of Korean because it's like, I can't remember. It's like 25% of Korean, some huge percentage have the last name Kim. And so I would go over to the K section. And I would look for a Kim, and there weren't any. And I remember feeling, sort of disappointed that there was nobody with my heritage, my background, who had written a book that was worthy of being put on a public library shelf. And then Eugenia Kim, I believe, was one of the first Korean American authors to be published, and her book, The Calligrapher's Daughter, came out. A beautiful book. And so a few months ago, it was Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and I tried to feature an Asian Pacific American author every day on my Instagram, and I couldn't even feature all of them because there were so many. And so if you look at my library, I have a K section, and there are multiple authors by the last name of Kim, including multiple people who have debuted this year. So I am thrilled, and it makes me so proud. And recently on my Instagram, I posted that when I was doing my Goodreads Reader's Choice Awards.
Right,
At I think 4 or 5 categories, there was a Korean American author in the semifinals. And again, I was so proud to cast my vote for that Korean American author because I would never have imagined that to happen when I was that little girl in the public library.
Oh my goodness, that is unbelievable. That is an amazing thing. Yeah, that's terrific. We love that. We love that. So you've got a couple of things that you're working on. You've got an entire shelf filled with things, which is terrific news. We're thrilled about that for you. And I love that. I think there was one other thing I wanted to ask you, which I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but there is a little bit of a walk down memory lane that has to do with some fruit stripe gum and some tab. And so when you read the book, there are these other surprises for people of a certain age, me, that really related to that scene when they're at the ball field, and really put me on those bleachers. And that was one of my favorite scenes in the book.
Oh, thank you. I was actually talking with a fellow author the other day, and she's writing a middle grade book. But her middle grade book had all these references to name brands from the 70s. And ultimately, I think we agreed that, like, you know what? Maybe those name brands from the 70s should be taken out because they don't add to the book, and they might be distracting for a middle grader because they're not going to get it. But for my audience, which I hope will be women or men and women of a wide variety of ages, but for particularly of our generation, there are certain things that are very evocative of the 70s and 80s, you know, things like Maybelline Kissing Potion and Fruit Strike Gum and Tab Soda. And for me, those are things that not only have kind of tactile or sensual memories associated with them. You remember that kind of fizz of Tab, or the bitterness of the Tab, the fake sweetness and the stickiness of the Maybelline lip, balm. But it also evokes memories, right? Like I remember what it felt like to go to the local drugstore and buy that Maybelline stuff. I felt like such a sophisticated girl.
Yeah. Meanwhile, if you let it dry too long, like your lips would get stuck together.
Yeah, it's almost like the equivalent of taking a sucker, like a lollipop, and like rubbing it around your mouth, and then you just have all this sugar on your lips. It's very sticky.
Oh
yeah. So like I said, you're kind of my soul sister with respect to this book. You get all my references and you appreciate them.
And of course I would read them and I would say to my husband, Andy, listen to this. And then I would talk about the little pocketbook that she had with all those little cosmetics. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I had that. I sat on those bleachers. I watched the big game and I, saw the really cute boy. And it was just, it was everybody. It was everybody's experience. It was my experience. So I am grateful. But I do have one last question for you, because I see a lot of people are on here, especially, well, James Wade was here, Nick Wade was here earlier, and he was waving and said hello. Because I love horror and horror books, do you have any horror books that you like? Do you have any like scary stories that you like to read?
Oh, that's so funny, because I think I saw something on Twitter or something about that. Like, what genre of books do you never read? And I don't read horror. I'm a complete fraidy cat. So anything, I know it's not horror, but I remember when I was backpacking through Europe one time, my brother had a collection of Stephen King stories, and he was reading them, he was addicted to them. And then I said, are there any in that collection that aren't scary? And he said, not really. And he said, but try this one. This is like the one that's the least scary. And I read it and I couldn't fall asleep that night. I was so petrified, and I still remember it to this day. So that little taste of horror or whatever sci-fi just scared me so much that it's not a category that I can read. Sorry.
Yeah, and just as a brief aside, you mentioned that you went backpacking through Europe. I also did that in the early 80s. I want to say it was like 81, 82. I can't remember the exact year, but we did that same thing. And then, of course, I watched the movie Hostel, and I'll probably never go backpacking in Europe again. Well, hopefully one of these days we can.
Well, when Beth and her brother go backpacking through Europe, or they go traveling through Europe, and they have a Let's Go, and it tells them to go to this piazza. That was,
I did that.
Totally taken out, like ripped out of my life. Yeah.
Yes, those Let's Go Europe books. Well, A.H. Kim, Ann Kim, thank you so much for being our second guest on the Merrick Library Author Series. I was thrilled to have you. I'm thrilled to talk about this book. This is the book, folks. I don't know if you can all see that. There it is. There it is. Look at that double.
I apologize. It's getting dark here, so my lighting has gone bad.
You're fine. That's okay. You rather that. And then you can, anybody wants to find the interview is episode 44, and we talk all about A Good Family and more. So I'm going to say goodnight to everybody who's been watching. I see Aileen is out there, and Ellen. Hi, Ellen Landauer, and Melissa and Nick. You guys are awesome. Next month, we have author Kathleen Rooney. She is the author of Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk, and her brand new book, which came out this year, was called Cher Me and Major Woodley. And boy, is that, I'm not going to say anything. You'll just have to watch episode 3. But, and thank you so much for being here. I am thrilled that, I was thrilled to see you again. It was just amazing.
Well, thank you again for being such a champion for my book, and for being a champion for so many authors. It's really, really appreciated.
Now, the best part is going to be me trying to log out. So
Yeah, we'll have this frozen look like,
yeah, right. So we're going to see if I can get it to work because that's going to be, there it is,
Bye,
stop live
everyone.
stream. All right, everybody, take care. Good night.
Bye.